Today, I'm sharing my recent interview with Erin Conley Barth. You may know her from her Instagram or YouTube channel, Enneagram Girl. Erin has been studying and researching the Enneagram since her introduction to it in 2011, progressing from curiosity-driven spreadsheets and a photo interview project to helping others understand their why through her YouTube channel. Erin is passionate about helping to facilitate self-understanding, and currently she is still studying, creating, and teaching while mothering her 4 young children. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
And let me ask you this. So you, because I've been kind of stalking your YouTube channel since I found that first video, and I had seen your account like a while back, but then I started going through your videos, and one of the last ones, I don't know if it was your last one, but you're like, I'm about to have triplets. Yeah. Right? Was that the last video you did?
I think I've maybe done 2 since, but yeah, it's funny. I went back and looked at that video recently too, and it was a little surprised. Like, I didn't realize how much you could tell my breathing was labored just because I was so huge.
How soon after that did you have them?
I think that video was at 34 or 35 weeks, and I actually carried them to 36 and then delivered them naturally. And we had actually no NICU time. God was so good to us, and we were able to bring them home on like the second day from the hospital. So
that's amazing. Blessing. So are you still doing coaching?
Yes. So I'm still doing consultations on the side. It's so funny you use the word coaching, and like for some reason I like never think of it that way, because consulting was something that kind of just came about for me, just out of my work. I guess I think of myself as more of a researcher, and then people just were responding kind of to what I was putting out there and asking. So just kind of started doing that. But yeah, I'm still doing that just very minimally on the side. But yeah, I've grown to love doing that. And I always laugh and apologize to people that like, I don't see them as a guinea pig, but I learn a lot from it. You
started I don't know when you started your Instagram, but I saw videos back from like 2017, 2018, like, so you were kind of like ahead of the big wave of.
Yeah, actually very far ahead. I'm almost coming up on 10 years of study. So I was introduced to the Enneagram through a couple at church when I was, almost 10 years ago, just because they had used it as a tool in their marriage. And I was like very highly skeptical at first, until I started noticing the way it was manifesting like in people I knew, and like really seeing that experientially, and started keeping a spreadsheet of like everyone I knew and where they fell, just to kind of like give myself some real life data of like, okay, like how is this? But yeah, and then have been studying since.
And so you're a 4, right?
I'm a 4 with a pretty heavy 5 wing.
Yeah.
There for a while, I wasn't sure like which side of that I fell on.
And then what about your husband?
My husband is a 7 with a 6 wing. Yeah, so it's a interesting combination, obviously, because of the like idealist thing. So we have some shared weaknesses, that's for sure. But
my husband is a 4 with a 5 wing, and I thought he was at first we were going back and forth like 5, because he just has so much of that withdrawing. But 4s are withdrawing also, but that like wanting to research things. But his creativity and his like outside of the box in all the ways, he's just such a unique, he's a music teacher and doing his own music studio and stuff. So he's definitely a 4, but I don't know if you had a chance to read some of my background on my conundrum with like, am I 9? Am I 6?
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started this community in January last year. And, but, have a counseling background, have been very much in the world of like discovering myself and wanting to help others and all of that. And so, I have so many peacemaker, just qualities, tendencies, and even the motivations. Like reading the Peacemaker, I just like, yeah, that's what I do. That's me. And so, anyway, over this past year with lots of life stressors and things, I am like, oh gosh, like I'm seeing 6 so much. And then I'm starting to attach, like I'm a very, very much an attacher of like attach meaning to things. So, well, this person's doing this because of this. And, or I'm doing this because I'm the youngest child, or I'm doing this because I'm a peacemaker. Or, and so I just attach meaning to everything. And I think that's a way of me making sense of life or making sense of myself. And I've always struggled to know myself and really understand myself. And like that confidence piece and identity has been really big for me.
And I would say that's true for like that whole triangle for sure.
Yeah. Yes. And so when I was watching your video about 9 and 6, and you made that comment that 3s, 6s, and 9s all in their own way struggle with that identity piece. And, I don't know exactly how you said it, but like, who am I anyway, is what you said. Yeah. And so I'm like, I got to talk to her.
Yeah. So 3, 6, 9, I feel like for sure. I've even heard them attributed to as like the most human Enneagram types. And last night I was thinking about that and I was like, oh, I need to read again, like why that is. But so can't really place where I've read that, but my experience of that. And then even from the text of looking at what their struggles and motivations are, 3, 6, and 9 really share that commonality of just like who am I really? And they all have different reasons for it. But really, if you look at all 3 of them, it's because they look outward from the self for identity in different places. So like 3 looks to the culture for like cultural validation of like what's the best, what's winning, like what is it to win in this culture, and I want to get my value there or my identity. And then like 6 looks to that like larger security thing, whether it's God or whether it's a corporate identity or whether it's being like a Cubs fan or going to anime conventions or like whatever group or larger than the self piece it is, they look for their identity in that. And then for 9, it's that tendency to really want to, I guess I always think of the sponge thing for 9 in just wanting to. And of course, this differs with instincts because your SX9 is going to be even more that way than even like the SO or SP9. But really just gleaning that identity from those around them and kind of struggling to tap into like, but like, what does my intuition say? And I think that that's even also why we see that kind of philosophical bent with 9, because at the heart, I think once 9s are integrating, and I know we'll maybe talk about that later, but like, they really are able to tap into like their own intuition and not really just soak it up from everyone around them.
I also know that 6s need to learn to tap into their intuition. So how does that, is that the commonality? Is it the same? Like when you say that, is it the same for both?
I think that the motivation is different. So like 6 is motivated by that seeking of security piece. So again, like the false place they get their identity from is the larger than the self security that they get their identity from. And even just using some of those examples I just mentioned, like when they're able to tap back into their intuition or like their true self, if you will, it's departing from that larger than the self-security piece and saying, you know what, no, like I can be safe just listening to like my own knowledge or my own intuition. And it reminds me of 6s that I've talked to who've talked about when they have to make a big decision, they're the authority people in their lives that they go to double check or to get their opinion or to be like, but what do you think? And how their experience is kind of, if they find that they have a different opinion or a direction they want to go that isn't affirmed by those authority people, that they really have to fight hard to listen to that if they feel like really convicted. And sometimes you will, so I think it's different things they're departing from. So 6 is departing from the need for security and 9's departing from that need to like always keep harmony at the front of their values and like not. And so they're able to see sometimes the necessity for displeasure among others, or I mean, maybe not even full-blown conflict, but just even like a disagreement about something, but like, that's okay,
Yeah. So do you see 6s struggling a lot with that conflict piece?
You know what? I actually would say it depends on instincts, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
So an SP6 is going to struggle a lot more with that. And maybe a social 6 as well, in order to like keep the, my husband likes to use the word consensus, like the social consensus, but like, because 6 is a reactive type, most 6s that I know are actually like pretty conflict oriented and like are okay, like throwing the torch, and sometimes do it like without thinking and have that. But you know, that's also where with 6, we have to look a lot at the fight or flight and like the, which direction does someone go with the phobic or counterphobic element.
Right.
So yeah, I would say that the counterphobic or the SX first for sure are going to be much more conflict oriented. But I think that, and actually my brother is a really good example. He's a 6, but he's a Marine. He's probably one of the most courageous people I know. And this is where I think people get 6 very wrong by thinking that all 6s are like, just like anxiety prone, fear-based.
Right.
You know, I mean, some like the SP variety is definitely more that way, but like my brother's like SOSX probably, and has a strong 7 wing. But he is like, his strategy in order to pursue security is to like, if there's a threat on the horizon, is to like punch it in the face, like immediately. So sometimes I think 6s see conflict as a means towards security. But so again, it's the cool thing about the Enneagram, that it really is all based in instincts, not even in like what someone's doing. Or sorry, motivation. I said instincts.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. So, okay, so back to 3. So the 3s are looking to culture to reflect back to them, or to kind of like measure up to. So if a 6, and let's talk a little bit about the disintegration and how maybe a 6 in disintegration would look like a 3, and how might that affect their identity piece?
Yeah. So whenever I think about disintegration for 6, it's several friends, but also several people I've consulted with come to mind in this really shared trait of focus on image. And so even when you see 3 as an image type, we see that in 6 disintegrating. And a lot of times what I've seen for 6s disintegrating, it becomes like a over focus on, like appearance, on like makeup, on fitness, on nutrition. I've seen a lot of 6s that I've known or worked with really go to that place of like almost turning their anxiety toward, and their security focus towards those things of image, and towards that, like, okay, like how do I get the best butt? Like, how do I make sure like my like wardrobe is up to date? Like, how do I win? And so instead of 3 saying, how do I win the approval and love of the culture, 6 disintegrating to 3 is saying, how do I win the security through my image? So, so I think for a 6 disintegrating to 3, it just becomes much more image prone and image focused. And whether that can be a spectrum of things, but
okay. And then and let me clarify there. So when we're talking about disintegration, you know, you hear the language, they look like a 3. And when it says they look like, are we kind of thinking about like the levels of health of a 3? Like if a 3 is more like an average range, then the 6 is going to kind of look into that. I'm just thinking for clarity of the listeners and for myself too.
Yeah. And I have seen that language as well, the like looks like thing, but I do think, what we're talking about is like average 3. So I guess the way I would see it is like 3's sin patterns. Like I use that term a lot because I think that helps people understand like what component of 3 we're talking about. It is that like pride, that vanity, the tendency towards deceit in order to win. So when we see 6 to disintegrate to 3, we do see them start to look a little bit like that, in the sense that their pursuit of image a lot of times comes across in a false way. Okay. So like it may come across through like spray tan. It may come across through like trying all the different diets in order to figure out like what I need in order to, feel like I'm winning the approval that will make me safe. And so I think that it has an artificial component, but to me, that's what looks like 3 when I see a 6 disintegrating in that way that pursues image.
That makes sense.
There is that part of like, it looks like, but I'd say it is the average 3 for sure.
Okay. And then what about a 9 disintegrating to 6 in terms of like that image part?
So I think that for nines disintegrating to 6, so actually because we see nines integrate to 3, the image part I think is actually on the high side for 9. So like the image part comes into play for a 9 when they start to think like, you know what, it's okay for me to like have sort of an individual style. The way I actually usually think about it is 9 stepping into leadership is an integration thing for big time. And it's so beautiful to see a 9 who usually hushes themselves and says, I don't want to like be that loud, annoying person. Like, I don't want to speak up, be able to say, you know what? No, like I have something of value to say. And like, I'm going to like take a risk and say it. And so the image part comes into play there on the high side as well of being visible. So that's positive for 9, that move towards 3 in the image of being visible and of caring for image and knowing that like image is okay. I think when 9's disintegrating to 6, that's a lot of times where when I've talked to, and actually I think the 9-6 misidentification problem is probably the most frequent one I've consulted on.
Really?
And it's probably because it's one of the most frequent in the population, honestly, just because 3, 6, and 9 are purportedly very high statistically. What I usually see people in that problem talking a lot about is anxiety or overthinking. And saying, okay, like, is it 6-ish to overthink or is it 9-ish to overthink? And really it's both. But I find that 9s overthink from a philosophical standpoint. So they're starting in this sort of like introspective place that their introspection gets out of control. And then it becomes overthinking and cannibalizes on itself.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
You know, like it becomes that ricochet thinking that 6s struggle with. And that sort of like, what if this, what if this, what if this? But I think 6s start from a place of already being in their heads. Cause,
did you just, I thought you were just talking about 6s. I'm sorry. So,
sorry. I probably like bled into
so were you saying 9s are already introspective or 6s are already?
I think 9s start from the place of introspection, whereas, because like most 9s that it's why even if you look at Myers-Briggs and correlation, 9s correlate a lot with like, I mean, I feel like I see like INFPs and INFJs like correlate a lot as 9.
That's what I've tested as.
Yes.
INFJ.
So like there's that intuitive piece, whereas like most 9s that I've talked to, and even in the text, we see this where 9s, one of the reasons they want peace is because they see the connectivity throughout the world between people and things and places in ways that a lot of us don't. And so there is this sort of like, it's why a lot of times I think 9s are very behind the scenes feeling, because they're like seeing all the connections from an intuitive place. And so there's that introspective side for 9, whereas I think there's a difference between introspection on the 9 side and for 6, like overthinking. Like introspection's more of like a gut intuitive thing for a 9. Whereas overthinking is a fully like mental head process.
Okay.
And I think that actually I would say, as we were talking about before, for a 6, it's that move towards 9 in integration that allows them to get out of that sort of like, well, what I joke with my husband is called illogical logic, because 6s have trouble trusting the intuition, as we were talking about. So when they move towards 9, they get more of that.
I'm thinking about more of that introspective piece because I have a group of 9s on Facebook, and because I am very introspective, I've asked them that question, and some of them are like, I don't think about myself at all. Like I don't, like I'm, and I, that could just totally be like their level of, they're growing in their self-awareness. So they just haven't, dug into that.
That is like a really interesting observation. And I think like, that's why I think of myself first as a researcher, because like, I love that like stuff, just polling and trying to weigh and compare and be like, all right, like what is the spectrum for 9? Because there is a spectrum within that. And I'd say some of that is probably even instincts, because like what our first focus is on sometimes, because I'd say like somebody, for instance, who is like more socially focused, maybe turned outward and not as turned inward. But yeah, I mean, some of that too could even be like a wing preference. Like I would say probably 9 with a 1 wing is a little more introspective than a 9 with an 8 wing.
Yes.
But that is really interesting that you asked that and got that feedback.
Do you mind if I ask you some questions just about me personally?
No. Yeah, okay. Go for it.
So I feel like I've operated so much as a 9. Like I have, like I was the youngest in my family, and I did feel like I was sitting in the background of the family. But as I get older and kind of assess that more, my parents were teenage parents when they had my brother. And so it's like they were just trying to juggle how to be an adult, how to have kids, how to, make money. So maybe my brother and my sister both also feel like they were in the background. Maybe we were just all kind of in our rooms doing our own thing. And the piece of the 9 that I attached to myself is, oh, well, my presence didn't matter, or did anybody see me? Did my voice matter? But then there's this very strong safety piece to me that I do, like, I've had a lot of fears through the years, and I have like generalized anxiety, and that's more of like a genetic piece. And then I have like a ADHD diagnosis, which many 9s say they just feel so scattered and they can't get things done, and they withdraw from that. And then when I look into the 6, I've become a part of some 6 groups, and they say like some of the same things, because they get so overwhelmed with all the things that they see they need to do. They're just like, I'm not going to be able to get this done. Nobody's helping me. What's the point?
Yeah. There's like several things you said that I'm like, oh man. Cause I mean, well, first of all, I'd say a lot of people come to the table in a, identification process with a diagnosis of some sort and ask that question of like, is this outside of Enneagram? Does this contribute to Enneagram? Like how does that apply? And I would say that's just part of the tapestry. Like that's part of the fabric. Like that's not outside of Enneagram. I would say that like when God creates us, that's like part of it. An example for myself, I'm narcoleptic. And like, there was part of me that, when I first started reading through the stuff was like, how does that apply? But I think it really does contribute to, it's almost like part of the nurture, if you will, like nature, nurture. It's part of what forces us to become what we become, and cope the way that we do. But I do think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying about both 6s and 9s experiencing some of that scatteredness and anxiety. But I mean, I very seldom met a 9 that didn't feel somewhat prone towards anxiety. I think that it comes from that place of like lack of action and being not so much a person of action, and like
the apathy. You mentioned the apathy in your video.
Yes. So there's anxiety when you have lots of ideas and thoughts, because 9 is that withdrawn, in my opinion, introspective person. There's all this thought life, but there's not very much action because of the apathy, that there's going to be quite a bit of anxiety, because where does that all go? Where does it all go? And like, if it's not coming out and being put into action, it kind of, it creates mayhem in the mind. I actually would say 9s probably experience that, that kind of anxiety more than 6s do. I would say that that's like a specific brand of anxiety, but like, I think 6s tend to be more on the this or this anxiety, like roots are in the indecision, because they're going back and forth between the security, like the authority piece, and themselves, and saying, do I choose this or do I choose this? And like, am I going to have safety from this entity or this society or this trend or whatever? And that's why I see a 9 as withdrawn and 6 is generally not withdrawn, because 6 finds that security in a society of sorts, whereas 9s can do that, but many times they stand outside of that and tend to be more of the, like, they tend to be more individualistic and can stand alone and say, I'm going to be in the background, but I'm going to stand over here. And it is sort of that example too that's given of 9's anger or stubbornness manifesting in the like boulder in a stream.
Yes.
That just sits there, and they're not going to aggress anyone, but they're not going to move either. And so I do think that tends to be like a huge difference too in that what that anxiety looks like is that the 6's anxiety is over the society and fitting into it and feeling like they have belonging, and they can look to the right and left and say, oh, you relate, I belong here. Whereas 9 doesn't crave that as much.
Okay. So I have a question about 3. And then, so I'll go with that first. So what does disintegration and integration look like for 3?
Yes. So 3 starting in that like core sin pattern of deceit, and what I really think is more like self-deceit. It starts with self-deceit and that belief that if they don't win, they have no value. Mm-hmm. And Enneagram has given me so much compassion for 3s that I didn't used to have. It's in that mentality of realizing that they really feel like they have no worth if they fail. So when they do, though, oftentimes, like when there's a failure, there's that disintegration to 9, where they bench themselves and they say, this is too risky to lose my value entirely. I'm going to sit on the sidelines and I'm going to do what's safe. And I'm going to just do a little bit. And I'm not going to do like, cause you know, the sort of average health 3 is like out there, like doing it, getting it, achieving it every day. And when they do, when they have some sort of big failure, usually I've seen this where they just reel back and they're like, okay, I'm not going to stop looking good. I'm not going to stop like presenting the image that I'm all together, but I am not going to risk it like I used to. And then there's that apathy piece.
So they're just sitting, pulling themselves back.
Yeah. And there's that, I think it's just less, I think too, you can see that less lack of extroversion when they're in that stress place. The extroversion kind of dials back. And whereas, it's the opposite for 9, whereas when 9s are in a healthy place, they tend to like not be as afraid of being more social. But then 3, when they're integrating towards 6, they're able to use that gift that they have in order to know. So like, I always see the gift that 3 has is knowing what people want. And it can kill them though, when they decide that they should always give it to people. And it's beneficial to them when they can say, I'm going to use that gift of knowing what people want, not just to benefit myself and like my own, like to look out for number 1 and my own like prowess, but to use it to benefit the group and use it to benefit. And I've seen 3s do this with like their family. I've seen them do it with like their corporate environment. I've seen them do it with like a non-for-profit but it's so cool to see more often than not. It really is like a literal switch from I'm using all my gifts of achievement and charm and knowing what people want to benefit me and my image, and turning that and saying, I'm going to benefit the image of this group.
Yeah.
And care about people.
Now, whenever people are integrating, whenever they're becoming more of who they're supposed to be or kind of living into their fullness, however you want to say it, are these movements, because I've listened to Beatrice Chestnut talk about, some of these movements are just unconscious. It's just happening. It happens throughout the day. We may be in the 6 space and be very much all or nothing thinking. And then we're kind of back. Like, I think I get a little bit of the levels of health and then the integration language confused. Do you think that when a person is integrated or integrating, it's more like they're maturing, like they're becoming more of that and they're able to stay in that place more often? Does that make sense?
I think that's actually like a really commonly asked question, and it's such a good one in that I think normally I would say it's kind of like being in traffic. If someone cuts you off, you may drop a few health points. Like it's not like you're just like, like I'm Mother Teresa, I'm going to be that way for like weeks on end, like it's not, it's much more human. And I think that's why I do prefer that perspective of it being about sin patterns, because like, if we think about the way that like our flesh controls us and our flesh rises up against any sort of progress we would make, it's that constant battle. And I do think that some of it is unconscious, because as we, like to point out too, like you can't just be like, okay, like I'm a 3 and I want to be healthy, so I'm going to just like study 6 and try to be a 6, like it doesn't work that way. You can't do that.
Right.
But, so the unconscious piece is definitely that piece that I think comes into play when we're just like doing healthy things, like being involved in like community with other people who want health too, and who will like hold us accountable, or when we're just like pursuing health, it unconsciously produces this growth.
Yeah.
But I do think some of it it may be once we are already growing that we may discover like, oh, I'm growing. And like, here are the things that are making that healthy for me. So like, yeah, for a 9, it might be a 9 who's progressing and realizes it, or maybe other people are calling that out in them and being like, hey, like, I love that you stepped up and shared and didn't hang in the back, that they may take note of that and be like, oh, like I need to keep that in mind.
Growing in that confidence.
Yep. And know that that's healthy for me. And somebody studying the Enneagram would see that too and be like, oh, that lines up. Like, I know that it's healthy for me to like realize I have needs, you know?
Yeah. That's
so
good.
I think it's some of both.
Okay. So I often say if I am in that 3 space. So let me rewind just a second. When I listened to, Enneagram and Coffee, and she talked about Sarah Jane Case, she talked about the soul child theory. She had an episode on that. She talked about the 9. It's like they have this, she said, itty bitty 3 that's inside of them that like always wanted to be acknowledged or was waiting to come out. Or she just kind of talked about that inner child that maybe we were more like a 3 when we were younger. And when she talked about that, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Because when I do see myself in the 3 space of achievement, being recognized for something, people saying, good job, keep doing this, I'm like, it is something like something's coming alive. But then I know on the 6 side of that, there are times, if I'm a 6, if we'll go there for a second, if I'm a 6, I can find myself very much trying to pursue something so hard that I get tunnel visioned. I'm just like, I got to get this done. People are expecting this. And if I don't, then I'm a failure. And I literally can see myself being either an unhealthy 6 or a healthy 9 at any given time. Like, when 9s are integrated and they're maybe pushing themselves too hard, do they come to that space of being like, I'm about to burn out, or I got to pull back away? Like, is this something that you've experienced?
Yeah, I think that the question that popped up in my head as you were talking was like, why? Like, why are you thinking that? You know, and
why am I thinking the failure part or the...
So when you were saying, there are times that you pursue something doggedly to the point of like, to the point of craziness where you like have to get it done and you feel crazed by it, like, or stressed by it.
Yeah.
My question would be, why are you pursuing it so doggedly? And that 6 and 9 would have different whys.
I'm pursuing, like, I just have this desire. I feel like I have a lot to give and a lot of ideas to share. I just don't know how to get them from here to out there. And so I just, it's like I'll go from 0 to 50. All of a sudden I'll have too many things on my plate. And then I'm just overwhelmed with all the things I have to do. And if I can't get them done, then I
feel stressed.
I feel stressed. I'm going to disappoint the people that I've committed to.
I was going to say, you started to say when you were first explaining that, you started to say like, oh, I can't remember how you phrased it, but you said like, I'm going to let people down, or like people are going to be. So I do think like a lot of what you're describing sounds more 9 to me. Like, I know this isn't like a typing consultation, but a lot of what you're describing sounds more 9 to me. Even the struggle you just described of getting ideas into fruition. But I have known some very, very highly creative 6s as well, who honestly probably are more productive people than 9s. The 9s I've known who are highly creative people. But that's generally, I think, because 6s tend to be such, like, there's this part of 6 that is like, it's like that loyalistic piece of like being such a hard worker and so devoted to whatever their commitments are or whatever they've said. And I think that 9 is not as much that way. Like 9 and 4 I was just thinking like, it's probably not helpful for you to have a 4, 5 husband like in that space, because like he probably struggles with that too.
Yeah.
But when 9s, I think, are pursuing all the tasks or getting all the ideas out into the world, it becomes a little bit harder, I think, to feel the dedication to the task.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah. A lot of times I'm like, why am I even doing this? I really just want to be like chilling. Like, I know I have something to give, but can I just do it just occasionally?
Yeah, no, totally. And I do think that's more 9 than it is 6, because usually the reason, and again, it depends on like where the person is in their like health process, but let's say average 6, it's usually because it has something to do with maintaining their place in this like society is so the wrong word, but their place in the, so I keep thinking like, okay, if they're like part of a book club that they're doing something for, they're thinking like, I find security in this book club that's been part of my life, and like I don't want to let these people down.
So they're very cognizant of that, like I find security in this, like
sometimes that's a good point, because like sometimes they're not, but I think like when we start talking about these things, most people I've consulted with, when I put it in those terms, generally they can be like, oh my goodness, like yes, that's my like Formula One fan club that I'm part of, that I've been part of for like 10 years, you know, or like even just being a Formula One fan gives me security because I feel like I'm part of I'm going to use the word society again, but I think like 9, because, and this hits on what we were talking about earlier, because 9 stands alone a lot more and isn't part of a society as frequently, perpetuating those goals and that vision is a lot harder. Not that they don't have community and people in their lives, but because it's usually like an individualistic idea or an individualistic like pursuit, whereas the 6's ideas and pursuits often are part of like something that's already going on. I would say 6's don't generally like spearhead things as frequently. Not that they can't. I always try to disclaim, like anyone listening to this, if you're a 6 who's spearheaded something, I believe you. But like, you know, but I think it's less common. Usually they go to like something that's already happening and then do a project or a thing to contribute to it. The social 9 might be an exception to that because they want to contribute to the social environment.
Let me ask you this last 3, 6, 9 question. Okay. So I really usually just talk to the 6 and the 9s because I'm self-absorbed. No, because I don't know if a lot of 3s are overthinking this the way I am and overthinking it the way 6s might be. Is that a true thing?
I think that 3s do overthink some things, but not to the extent of 6 and 9.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So, so if you were to give 6s and 9s your best advice of how we can utilize our arrows, what would be kind of like your 6s, you need to do this more, and 9s, I just want to see more of this from you?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that like we spoke to the 9 of this a little bit earlier, so I'll hit that one first, which is, just really trusting that internal world enough to let it out and being willing to risk being embarrassing, or like it's a phrase I hear over and over from 9s, which is like being obnoxious or being like that person who talks too much.
They don't want to be that, right?
So I'm like, be willing to talk a little bit too much in order to share your inner world with people, and of course like within boundaries and within trusted spaces. But like I whenever I see 9s do that, it pays off so much. And I think the more we all, no matter what Enneagram type you are, do the things that are hard and scary, the more you do them bigger, because you're like, oh, like that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. And it feels good. You're like, oh, it's nothing broke, nothing shut down, nobody hates me.
For sure. And then 6s, I would say, I've talked to a lot of 6s who have said that writing or journaling helps them a lot with just brain dumping when they have like so much like noise going on in their minds. And I would say too, like trusting yourself to deviate sometimes from the opinions of those people or that person in your life, like say it's your mom or your best friend or whoever, like trusting yourself enough sometimes to say like, oh, like I really wanted the blue pair of shoes, not like the red pair of shoes. And even if my mom likes the red ones, and you know what, this probably goes for 6s and 9s, which I know doesn't help our subject at hand. But yeah, just trusting the intuition And I think for sixes too, a lot of times that means stepping away from the subculture that they're really involved in enough to look at themselves.
Yeah.
And to know that they can be safe without having to go to Comic-Con with everyone, or without having to like watch the Super Bowl every year, or without, whatever it is. Kind of see it as like paying the dues to the society in order to like be okay.
Yeah.
And being able to step away from that long enough to like look at the self.
I want everyone to know how to find you. And your life is crazy right now, right? You have like 4 littles, you have 3, you have triplets, and then you have a newborn, but you're the Enneagram girl. And so I know people want to know about you and how to find you.
Yeah. And you know what? I love it's why I'm still studying the Enneagram, is because it's so fascinating to me. And as I said, like coaching is not my first hat, but I have really come to love doing that and walking alongside people to kind of, I always like to say, like, I know the Enneagram and you know you, and like, we can talk about it. And if that helps you, and I found that it really does help people a lot. So, you can find me on Instagram, as you mentioned earlier. That handle is enneagram.girl. And then my email is enneagramgirl@yahoo.com. I do also have a blog that's still active on WordPress. I don't add to it right now. As you said, like triplet 2-year-olds doesn't make for too much of that. But I'm also on YouTube. YouTube is kind of, I think that's where you found me, you said.
Yeah.
And that's where I think most people will find me. So,
and I like your little song.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. It's been really funny, the varied feedback I've received about that. I never thought that would be such a focus.
That's funny.
I was just like, I need some sort of thing to go with this.
Well, I'm married to a 4, so I know exactly. As soon as I saw your videos, I was like, yeah. I showed my husband. I'm like, look, this is you.
That's funny. That's so funny.
So anyway, awesome. I hope you have a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun.